Moin, ihr wunderbare Menschen des Interwebs. Ich begrüße euch ganz herzlich zurück zu meinem Let's Play von The Great Ace-Attorney Chronicles. Es geht in den zweiten Verhandlungstag und ich bin aufgeregt, ich bin gespannt. Ich hoffe wirklich, dass wir irgendeine Reaktion von Kazuma bekommen. Da würde ich mich drauf freuen. Good morning to you, Mr. Naruhodo. Oh, good morning, Professor. Ready for today's proceedings? I hope so. I should be. Even I with... Good morning, my dear fellows. Oh, Mr. Sholmes, you're here. Why, naturally, a true gentleman stands shoulder to shoulder with his friends in battle at all times. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I will see you later, then. Now, Professor, we really need you to remain calm in the courtroom today. Yes, do try your hardest not to enter the witness stand uninvited again. Yes, I will. I realize it was a mistake, but my dear fellows, I must interject. You're still here, Mr. Sholmes. What's the matter? Surely you've overlooked some praise, have you not, to be cast in my direction, Sorry, I don't follow. Must I spell it out? I, the great Sherlock Sholmes, the greatest detective of worldwide acclamation, arose at some ungodly hour to be here now. First thing in the morning, a miracle, you must agree. Well, if I must agree, then... As you know, my sleep is quite impregnable. Iris had to employ her full gamut of tactics. She pulled the covers off, shook me, poked both cheeks, punched me and kicked me from the bed. Then she poured a boiling cup of her latest experimental blend on my face, and at last I was bestirred. Oh my, Iris has been busy. Iris doesn't have it in her to go that far, she's too nice. Ah, I sense the spirit of a fellow scientist, the one who relishes the infinite possibilities of blending tea. I'm the one worthy of praise here, not Iris. This is my victory. Sorry to cut in. Oh, Inspector Gregson. Good morning. Gregson, my dear fellow, why the grim expression at this delightfully early hour? Oh, I don't know. Maybe because I've been confronted with a grimmer expression, huh? Dear me, are you going to take that insult lying down, Professor? What? I don't know. Oh, Professor. Anyway, here's the paperwork you asked for. What paperwork? Ah, I took the liberty of requesting it yesterday. I have a feeling it may prove useful. You wouldn't believe the hoops I had to jump through to get this brought out of the archives. It's the professor's autopsy report. That mass murderess? Who killed 5 members of the aristocracy? He was found guilty in a closed trial 10 years ago now. It was all done under wraps, and he was quickly executed soon after the trial. It's all in here. Okay. I don't know what to say. Thank you, Inspector. Yes, much obliged, Gregson. Us lowly lot at the yard are just doing what we can, in the shadow of the great Detective Sholmes, of course. Well done, Professor Hairbrain. This is it. Today we are going to lay all this to rest at last. I wish you the best of luck, Professor. I suppose he will be in here today, will he? Drebber. Yes, we expect the prosecution to summon him as a witness. I'm still amazed that you managed to find him in just one day. I really owe you both so much. Counsel and the defendant, the trial is about to resume. Kindly make your way into the courtroom at once. This is it then, the final chapter. Funny, my heart's racing a little. I've not felt this before actually. A strange foreboding. As if something's going to happen in this trial that I'm not ready for. But I can't let this distract me from the only thing that really matters. Finding the truth. Okay, ich werde mir auch gleich nochmal den Autopsiebericht angucken. Ich glaube, nur den Autopsiebericht können wir uns noch angucken. Das haben wir ja, glaube ich, untersucht. Nee, noch nicht ganz. Okay, den Kopf von der Wachsfigur haben wir noch. Jetzt wirklich. Ah, doch hier. This look very strong, doesn't it? There's definitely no way you could remove the mask yourself if it was put on you. A terrible way to treat someone, even a convicted criminal. I know, it's starting to make me livid, actually. Miss Naruhodo, please. I mean, just think about it. Imagine if you had an itch on your cheek all of a sudden, you'd be utterly helpless. Well, yes, that's true. But I'm not sure that warrants quite so much anger. Oh, right, sorry. Okay. Ich glaube, mehr können wir hier nicht untersuchen. Okay, dann den Cage hatten wir uns angeguckt. Dann gucken wir uns noch den Bericht an. Condemned Prisoner. 3 days for confidentiality. Jesus Christ. Pseudonym the Professor. Death by hanging confirmed at midnight. 17th June. Courtney Stevens. Ist das alles? Okay. Hatte mir ein wenig mehr erhofft. Na gut, schauen wir mal, wie uns das noch weiterhelfen kann. In the name of Her Majesty, the Queen, I hereby declare this court to be in session again. We resume the public hearing of Albert Harebrain, here present, who stands accused of murder. Are the counsels for the prosecution and defense ready to proceed? The prosecution is ready, my lord. The defense is ready, my lord. As promised, Lord Fonziques has his apprentice with him. His apprentice with memory loss. If I may, Lord Fonziques. Yes, my lord. There appears to be someone standing at your side. Yes, my apprentice and assistant. The prosecution believes today's proceedings will see the complexity of this case rise considerably. I therefore instructed my assistant to attend to ensure the smooth running of the trial. And the smooth running of liquid refreshments, by the look of it. The way he holds himself, the way he moves, couldn't be anyone else. But he's still suffering from amnesia, so there's really nothing we can do at the moment. I know, but it's so very hard. It would appear the prosecution has done a fine job in responding to the demands of the court made yesterday. I understand you have successfully secured the engineer who disappeared from the scene on the day in question. Yes, my lord. I intend to call him as a witness shortly. Very good, very good. Now then, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, who have been chosen at random to represent the will of the people in this courtroom today, are you ready and willing to proceed? Of course, my lord. I'm sure we all understand the importance of doing our civic duty. I do so despite deception and deceit. I find it so very wearing. To take a man's life with a conjuring trick, it is against the magician's code not to mention the law. Any fake scientist should feel the wrath of God, if you ask me. We have to listen to what's said on both sides, defense, and then settle one-on-one. That's it, isn't it? Wasn't like this in my day. Wasn't like this at all. If all parties are ready to proceed, you may begin, Lord Fonziques. Before I do, my lord, there is a report I must read to the court. Yesterday, at the Great Exhibition Grounds, the evidence of primary importance in this case, the super high voltage instantaneous kinesis machine which was installed on the experimentation stage, was deliberately destroyed in an explosion affected by an unknown person or persons. It was what? An explosion? This is an outrage. Yes, I heard this grave news yesterday. Scotland Yard submitted a report to my office in the evening. I read that the machine was blasted to smithers and the wreckage reduced to ashes in the flames. I have here a photographic print of the scene taken in the wake of the explosion. It shows what little remains of the machine. Yes, a terrible business. Did it to destroy the evidence, did he? That Drebber. The court will take this print as evidence, counsel. Okay. Late yesterday afternoon, the protection afforded to the machine by the Special Dispensation for Scientific Equipment Act was revoked. However, before a thorough investigation could begin, the invention was obliterated from existence. As such, this will become a very different trial. As it stands now, with no evidence on which to draw meaningful conclusions, the authenticity of the kinesis machine will remain forever in obscurity. Indeed, a most unfortunate state of affairs. However, one thing remains clear. The victim's death was the result of the actions of the accused. Of that we can be certain. For it was the accused himself who was operating the machine and who ultimately caused its loss of control. As Lord von Zieks rightly says, this is a very different trial now. The accused accepts responsibility for his part in the events that transpired. He acknowledges that Mr. Resman died as a result of the accident caused by his machine's malfunction. However, unbeknownst to the professor, he was being deliberately deceived by a pair of very clever fraudsters. Names, counsel, if you please. The engineer, Mr. Drebber, and the victim himself, Mr. Resman. So what exactly were these two men up to behind the defendant's back? The defense intends to expose that information, thus establishing the unequivocal innocence of the defendant. Thank you, counsels. The positions of the prosecution and defense have been clearly stated. Lord von Zieks, summon your first witness, please. At once, my lord. The prosecution calls the engineer, Mr. Drebber, to the stand. State your name and occupation for the court. Name, Drebber, occupation. Hard to pin down, I would say. Your file indicates that you are currently being investigated in connection with another case. The theft of a waxwork model, is it? A most extraordinary sounding business. But that has no bearing on this trial, I assure you. Cleave it from your mind. You're familiar with the public experiment carried out at the Great Exhibition some days ago? The accused super high voltage instantaneous kinesis demonstration. Yes, you could say that. I'm aware of it. There was a terrible accident, wasn't there? It was you, Mr. Drebber, who constructed the vast machine used in the experiment, or so our investigations indicate. Can you confirm your involvement? Yes, I constructed it in precise accordance with the blueprints, but that's all. Then the court would be very interested to hear your thoughts about the machine, I'm sure. An amazing device, if you ask me. The pinnacle of modern science, making instantaneous kinesis a reality at last. What? Good gracious, do you mean to say that the experiment was bona fide? Is that your belief, sir? Yes, that is very much my belief. Such a waste that it blew up. But we've already established the machine was nothing more than a prop for an elaborate conjuring trick. You've established nothing of the sort. All that was shown during yesterday's proceedings is that the same outcome could have been produced by means of stage trickery. It defense merely proposed a method and demonstrated its feasibility, nothing more. But we have procrastinated long enough, I feel. Witness, you will now give your formal testimony about the machine that you constructed for the purpose of the demonstration at the Great Exhibition. Understood. Okay, schauen wir mal. The Kinesis machine. I met the young professor approximately 1 year ago through Mr. Esmond's introduction. He provided me with the blueprints and I constructed the machine to his precise specifications. It was no trick. If the whole show was a fraud, it would have required a body double. Tell me, did the victim have a twin? All the spectators saw the birdcage appear above their heads and then crash headfirst into the crystal tower. A terrible accident, I grant you. Perhaps the science on which the machine was built was flawed somehow. Moment. Aber, also er hat jetzt gerade gesagt, dass der Käfig mit der, sag ich das jetzt, Kopfseite, zuerst in den Crystal Tower gecrashed ist. Aber wir haben noch, als wir den Käfig untersucht haben, genau das Gegenteil davon festgestellt, oder? A body double? That goes without saying, surely. To give the impression that something has moved when in reality it hasn't. It's a basic conjuring principle. That deception cannot be achieved without substituting the original with a fake at some point in the performance. But would I be right in saying you haven't managed to establish anything along those lines? Incidentally, the prosecution has already confirmed that Mr. Esmond had no twin siblings. It's my understanding that this witness is well versed in conjuring or artfulness, but such talents do not indicate that he was actually able to accomplish what he claims. Namely, the construction of what by all accounts must have been an extremely complex scientific machine. Whatever do you mean? Yesterday's proceedings brought the true nature of your past exploits to light, Mr. Drebber. Indeed it did, my lord. As a swindler who preys on innocent scientists to elicit government grant money through conjuring know-how. Yes, it's true that I possess considerable knowledge of stage magic. But crucially, my scientific knowledge more than matches that of any academic in the field. Investigation of the witnesses' workshop attests to that claim, my lord. As evidence, the police found this Royal Society trophy for young talent and science there. Yes, that's true. We spotted it there ourselves. If a hypothesis is sound, it can always be forged into a physical manifestation with sufficient skill. So I may have sold the secrets of some deceptive wiles to sniveling, talentless scientists in the past. Would you therefore assert that the explosion of the machine was an unfortunate accident, or, of course, a deliberate act of murder carried out by misuse of the science? Counsel for the defense, your cross-examination, please. Yes, my lord. Okay. So, jetzt möchte ich mir nochmal ganz kurz das durchlesen. So, weiter hinten. If the whole show was a fraud, nee. All the spectators saw the birdcage appear above their heads and then crash head first into the crystal tower. So, und hier würde ich jetzt sehr gerne den Cage präsentieren, weil das ist falsch. We've examined the birdcage that crashed into the crystal tower ourselves. As you can see, the cage, which is a wooden construction, has sustained damage in one particular spot. Following the explosion, it fell some 30 feet into the glass of the crystal tower. That level of damage is to be expected, surely. I agree. The damage itself is entirely understandable. What doesn't make sense is the location of that damage. All the breakages in the wood are at the base of the birdcage, not the top. What are you saying? That's the opposite of that's the opposite of where they should be. That's right, my lord. The birdcage that was at the scene is damaged at its base. So we have reports of the birdcage falling headlong into the crystal tower, yet the damage is at the bottom. The only way to reconcile these two facts is to accept that there were two birdcages in play that day, which were at some point switched. Switched during what wasn't a scientific experiment at all, but an elaborate piece of stage trickery. Good gracious, explain yourself, witness. Well... If we examine the facts, there's only one logical conclusion we can draw. The damage on the base of the birdcage clearly indicates that it crashed tail first into the tower. But multiple witness reports claim it fell head first. The birdcage materialized in the sky next to a balloon flying over the stage, following a spontaneous explosion at an altitude of some 60 feet above ground level, which is approximately 18 meters. It then proceeded to fall some 30 feet into the crystal tower in the ensuing deflagration. Witness reports amid such chaos are notoriously unreliable. But the victim's neck was broken. He plummeted 30 feet inside a heavy wooden cage. However he fell, it would be unsurprising to find one or two of his vertebrae crashed. Riveting scientific analysis of events from the prosecution there. Though, to be even more rigorous, you would have to say it was only one vertebra, actually. He wasn't quite for long. I find it hard to see what's motivating Lord Van Zieks. This witness is clearly a swindler and one who deceived a personal friend of his. If you're going to establish his deception, do it right. Sorry? I feel like that's the undertone here. Ah, yes, and there's one more point. The defense appears to have forgotten. It obviously wasn't a trick, as a certain truth very plainly demonstrates. What? It seems to me that the cross-examination had better continue until we resolve this matter. Mr. Drebber, you will amend your testimony with details of this truth. Of course, we must treat the matter scientifically after all. Nearly had him there. Okay, the kinesis clearly took place because there is nowhere else 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen from. Wait, what? Clearly took place because there's nowhere else 30 feet high for the birdcage to have fallen from. Doch. Und zwar, was zeige ich jetzt dafür vor? Das Foto davon? Oder... Wo ist es denn hier, der Sketch? Weil wir haben ja gesehen, dass... Man hat ja oben drauf gesehen, dass da so eine Vorrichtung war, die aufklappen konnte und dann hätte der Käfig nach unten fallen können. Ich weiß jetzt natürlich nicht, wie hoch genau das ist, aber ich würde jetzt mal sagen, dass diese Höhe ungefähr mit dieser Höhe gleich ist. Also ich kann mir schon vorstellen, dass das auch so 18 Meter eventuell sein könnten. This is a diagram of the experimentation stage and its surroundings. We know that somehow the birdcage appeared in mid-air before falling down into the crystal tower. A fall of about 30 feet or 9 meters. Ja, 9 Meter. Ja, stimmt. Weil bis zum... ist ja in der Höhe vom Crystal Tower gecrashed, also 9 Meter. Ja, das ist sogar tatsächlich sehr realistisch dann. Das genau mit der Experimentation Stage von der Höhe. However, if you examine the diagram carefully, you will see that there is one other possible location from which the birdcage could have fallen. The same distance of 30 feet. Well, it appears the defense has a possible explanation to put forward. Go ahead, counsel. Yes, my lord. Of course. You will indicate the place to which you are referring on the same diagram. The alternative location from which the birdcage could possibly have fallen, the requisite 30 feet. Ja, hier so ungefähr, ne? The place I'm referring to is here. But that's where the birdcage would have been to begin with. Which is exactly the point, my lord. Yes, the birdcage was in the machine on the stage, but what we must also consider is the height of the stage itself. Go on, counsel. It turns out that the experimentation stage was built at a considerably height above ground level. If you look at the diagram, in fact, you will see it's about the same height above the ground as the balloon was above the crash site. When the experiment got underway, the machine and the birdcage were engulfed in steam. At that moment, the floor of the stage gave way, and if we assume there to be a void underneath, this birdcage and the one seen by the audience would have fallen almost exactly the same distance. Once again, my lord, this all points to the fact that there was not one birdcage, but two. My learned friend has no evidence that the stage had such a contrivance in its design. Someone is responsible for the criminal destruction of the kinesis machine itself, it's true. However, the stage still stands. And take a moment to look at the photographic print of the scene following yesterday's explosion. Good lord, the metal roll that formed the floor of the machine is undone. Yes, most likely blown open by the force of the explosion that destroyed the rest of the machine. The defense calls for the space below the stage to be investigated immediately. Mr. Drebber, it was you who built the kinesis machine, which means that it was you who built the two bird cages that were used to carry out this deception. Whether Professor Hairbrain's hypothesis is sound or not makes no difference, because it's the construction of this machine that matters, a machine designed to take Mr. Esmond's life. And lay the blame firmly at the professor's door, something that could only have been carried out by you, Mr. Enoch Drebber. If my learned friend has reached the end of his wild assertions, the prosecution would like to crush the defense's argument slowly but surely. Well, your argument fails to hold water on two counts. Two? Firstly, before and after the experiment, this witness went nowhere near the kinesis machine. Every relevant member of staff from the exhibition has attested to that. And I believe members of Scotland Yard have also been on watch duty at every public experiment. In other words, Mr. Drebber had no opportunity to switch the alleged pair of bird cages. But I've already explained why he wouldn't have needed to. The nonsense with the crossbow, that doesn't bolster your case at all. The man who disappeared from the stage and the man who crashed into the tower are one and the same. The forensic investigation team's report is unequivocal on that point. And the second flaw in your assertion, it's a distinct lack of motive. Why would this man have wanted to take the victim's life? He had no reason to do so. Motive? Do I have to think of everything myself? I have here a contract provided by the witness. What contract is this, Lord Von Zieks? The contract into which Mr. Drebber entered with the victim, Mr. Esmond. It reads, Mr. Drebber is to receive 30% of all remunerations from government grants or other income. 30%, certainly very favorable contractual conditions. But there was one very important provision bolded onto that clause. What? Mr. Drebber may only uphold this right on condition that both contracting parties are alive. In other words, if either of us were to die, the contract would become null and void. So you see, I had nothing to gain from Mr. Esmond's death. The diametric opposite, in fact. Need I say more? The witness had neither an opportunity nor a reason to commit the alleged crime. In short, the possibility of Mr. Drebber having done as you suggest is nil. It seems the defense assertion was somewhat wide of the mark. Lord Von Zieks, you will submit the contract as evidence, please. Okay. It's true. If Drebber had no opportunity to switch the birdcage under the stage with the one in the Crystal Tower, he couldn't have done it. And in any case, I have no idea what his motive might have been. There is one aspect of your argument that still holds true, however. There were 2 birdcages. The prosecution is unable to deny that. So I'm sure you're on the right lines, Mr. Naruhodo, and I've no doubt there are other aspects of your assertion that are undeniable truths too. Well, it would seem that the defense has no rejoinder to offer. Well, I must say I'm a little surprised. I came here to testify about the machine I built and instead my reputation is defiled. But the prosecution's counter has set the record straight, I think. It's impossible that I'm the culprit. At the beginning of this trial, we believed that there was only 1 birdcage. Yet, now we know there must have been 2. In other words, there was more to the demonstration than we realized at first. I think it's abundantly clear that the same applies to the culprit. Get to the point. The stage demonstration was constructed and set up in its entirety by you, Mr. Drebber. Therefore, it's inconceivable that you had no hand in the events that transpired. So if circumstances mean it's impossible that you could have carried out the crime yourself, it points to the fact that someone else was involved. Someone else? Counsel, are you suggesting? Yes, my lord. Mr. Drebber had an accomplice. An accomplice now? Well then, I presume you are prepared for what's to come. Now that you're accusing not only this witness, but someone else of the most serious of crimes. If these accusations turn out to be false, then make no mistake. The prosecution will demand an equally serious punishment for your slander. Well, counsel, do you intend to pursue this course and formally accuse another party of involvement in this matter? What do I do here? At the moment, this is little more than a hunch on my part. I don't know for sure if Drebber had an accomplice, or even if he really is a culprit here. One way or another, though, I have to make my position clear, as a lawyer. So what's my stance going to be? Did Drebber have an accomplice, or not?
Aber wer wäre denn dazu in der Lage?
Also, wer würde denn als Komplize in Frage kommen? Es muss jemand sein, der ja Zugang zu der Maschine hatte. Also auch nachdem eben dieser Unfall passiert ist. Und da fällt mir jetzt von all den Personen, die wir kennen, nur eine Person wirklich ein und das ist Dr. Seif, wirklich. Ansonsten würde mir niemand einfallen. Sie ist ja die leitende Partei gewesen für das Investigation-Team und hat ja niemanden an diese Maschine rangelassen. Also, wenn, dann kann das nur sie gewesen sein. The defense is ready to name Mr. Drebber's accomplice. Somehow the two bird cages must have been switched. Everything points to that. Yet, according to the coroner's report, that's not a possibility. But that inconsistency itself is a clue. Counsel, my lord, you have received the stark warning already. If you are nevertheless determined, then I must now ask you to identify this alleged accomplice by name. So, your answer, please. Who do you claim to have been Mr. Drebber's accomplice? The name of the person in question is... What's wrong, my Nipponese friend? Surely fear doesn't bind your tongue now. It's a little late for that. Of course, I'm afraid. After all, naming her in this capacity is definitely going to make waves. A lot of waves. I could very well turn every single person in this courtroom against me. I'm sure it will be alright, Mr. Naruhodo. Thank you, Miss Usato. The enemy always appears larger than life, but you will appear exactly the same to the enemy. Alright then, here goes. You've kept us waiting long enough. Your answer, counsel, now. The person who colluded with Mr. Drebber in order to carry out this wicked crime is Scotland Yard's coroner, Dr. Courtney Seif. What the blazes are you talking about? The head of the forensic investigation team and the coroner who conducted the autopsy on the victim. We know there were 2 bird cages, so who could have carried out the switch to complete the illusion? The accident happened in front of a huge crowd of spectators, and the area was immediately sealed off. Then everyone, police officers included, were banished to make way for the forensic investigation team. When else could the switch have occurred? It can only have been in that team's presence. It's essential that the court determines exactly what happened following the incident. The defense demands that Dr. Seif be summoned to the witness stand at once to testify. You've got a nerve, lad. Standing up there, dragging the Yard's name through the mud. I didn't mean to... I know the woman very well. There's no better dead room worker out there. How dare you call her a criminal? My learned friend's imagination appears to be wilder than the East End at night. But the recklessness of your accusation aside, there is another grave problem with your argument. One which the prosecution demands you address at once. A grave problem? My word. Who do you claim acted as the victim's doppelganger? What? Certainly, if the birdcage containing the body of the victim was exchanged for another, that cage must also have contained the body. And yet, no missing persons or accidental deaths of anyone even remotely resembling the victim have been reported. Which means there was no one dead or alive who could have fulfilled the role of a body double for Mr. Esmond. That's true. If my argument is that there were 2 birdcages, then there must also have been 1 person inside each. But I don't know if I've got an answer to this yet, have I? What can I do to reveal how this body double stunt was achieved? Ich glaube, ich weiß es. Es war keine zweite Person, also keine lebendige Person, sondern ein Wachsmodell. Very well, the defense will address my learned friend's concerns by presenting evidence that reveals the true nature of Mr. Esmond's body double. Good gracious, evidence? I do hope this isn't filibustering, counsel. The court is expecting a name. If you think you have relevant evidence, present it now. The body double and the birdcage were hiding inside the balloon that was floating above the stage, which means that any witnesses would only have seen them from 60 feet away. So who was it that appeared out of that explosion some 18 meters above the spectators? The body double inside the second birdcage was... We know that the victim, Mr. Asman, was in the birdcage that was situated inside the kinesis machine on stage, and therefore he couldn't have been inside the second birdcage. Instead, that contained something else. What's been described as a body double, which is what fell from the sky and crashed into the crystal tower. Yes, Counsel, according to your somewhat elaborate version of events. And that body double inside the second birdcage was in fact... It's alright, Mr. Naruhodo. You're ready for this. Just steel yourself and come out with it. Thank you, Miss Susato. I needed that. As I was saying, the body double inside the second birdcage was, as unbelievable as it may seem, that thing there. Open your eyes and look into mine, my Nipponese friend. Now tell me, what are you playing at? Stand firm now, Ryunosuke. This is the time to show your Japanese spirit. As the court will observe, this is a waxwork model. A model, in fact, of an infamous London murderer from 10 years ago, the Professor. You started by indicting the leader of the forensic investigation team as an accomplice in this crime, and now you've moved on to indicting waxworks. Yes, that's about the size of it. But why? And why this waxwork? It looks nothing like the victim. In fact, it could hardly resemble him less. What possible justification can you give? If you want to know why, ask Mr. Drebber. Just days before Professor Harebrayne performed his public demonstration, Mr. Drebber abducted this model from Madame Tuspel's. And 2 days after the incident at the Great Exhibition, he returned it to the museum. Then, the timing. This is true, Mr. Drebber. At first, I couldn't see why Mr. Drebber would have stolen the waxwork and then give it back again. But now the reason is clear. He took it so that he could put it inside the second birdcage as a body double for Mr. Asman. Are you hearing this, ladies and gentlemen of the jury? Are you hearing the defense's astonishing proposal? That the witness fabricated this vast machine with the intention of deceiving some wretched scientist, that he did so in collusion with the country's finest coroner on a public stage in front of a vast audience. And that, to effect the deception, he used a waxwork model that in no way resembles the victim. Are we really to believe this far-fetched tale? What do you decide? Wait. Yes, if you put it like that, of course it sounds implausible. I need to speak, if you please. Go ahead, Mr. Foreman. Myself and my colleagues have reached an agreement. Very good. In that case, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you will state your leanings for the court to hear now. Yuzai.
Yuzai.
Yuzai. Yuzai.
Yuzai.
Yuzai.
Also, dass sie jetzt daraufhin eine Entscheidung treffen, das finde ich jetzt schon ein bisschen schwach. Also bitte. Ja, anstatt dass man sich das irgendwie weiter anhört und so, ja, nee, das ist gelogen, also muss der jetzt schuldig sein. Das ist, also kommt. Das hätte man ja besser machen können.
So, as indicated by the foreman, the jury has reached a consensus. I knew that was going to happen. We shall get through this, Mr. Naruhodo, as we always do. And uncover some new truths along the way, I'm quite sure. Yes, I agree. I'm going to have to appeal to the jurors as usual, and see if I can persuade them to change their minds. The defense will now embark on a summation examination. Are you and your fellows ready to proceed, Mr. Foreman? We are, my lord. Very well. In that case, I ask you now to state clearly for all present to hear the grounds on which each of you has decided that the defendant is guilty of the crime of which he is charged. Und bevor wir hier weitermachen, gibt es hier einen Cut. Ich bedanke mich ganz herzlich fürs Zusehen. Hoffe, ihr hattet Spaß. Und wenn ihr mögt, sehen wir uns sehr, sehr gerne im nächsten Part wieder. Bis dahin, ciao.